Today we'll look at the Brutalis Dreadnought, a very potent addition for your Space Marine list's melee. And yes, he can kill a knight alone, with some caveats we'll discuss later. So what is a Brutalis Dreadnought? Some general information. It's a purely melee Redemptor cousin, and even though I'm always pushing for versatility as much as possible, and I also think that Redemptor is a wonderful platform, I also understand the beauty of simplicity, where you just want to advance a thing into your opponent's lines, charge, and then potentially explode in those lines, doing as much damage as possible. And that also can work quite well if your list otherwise is well-rounded. So as you understand, he lacks most of the shooting output of the Redemptor, and also lacks the -1 damage. For now, because I have a sneaky suspicion that the new Codex Space Marines that we'll see just next week, if my memory serves me well, so the -1 damage on the Redemptor may go because the Tyrannofax lost its -1 damage in the Codex Tyranids, and they might do the same to our precious Redemptor. We'll just have to wait and see. If the Redemptor loses his -1 damage, then there will be even bigger argument for Brutalis depending on the price. And the price for the Brutalis is 175, the price for the Redemptor is 210, so quite a considerable difference. And also what Brutalis lacks with those things, he compensates with significantly better melee. So he has +1 attack on his melee attacks. He also has twin linked on his talons or fists, depending on what you choose. Otherwise, they're just the same thing, just the talons don't have the bolters attached to them. The fists have, but talons have double modes. So you would almost always want talons. And the talons also have the sweep mode, as I said, so you will have much more versatility, especially compared to Redemptor. He also has a mortal wounds output on the charge, and multi-meltus and a bit of stubber fire for his shooting. And multi-meltus can be useful if you're very up close to a vehicle and you want to soften him up. Coming back to the knight theme, that will be very useful. Weirdly, he has the same move as the Redemptor, and this I think was a mistake because they've reduced the movement of all the Dreadnoughts. So the Contemptors, for example, they were 8-inch move, they became 6-inch move. But the Brutalis, who was like the melee Dreadnought, so he was 10-inch move compared to an 8-inch move of the Redemptor, he went to 8, but the Redemptor stayed at 8, which I love as a Redemptor fan, but I don't like that as someone who wants Brutalis to be better with actual melee stuff, and he really needed that 10-inch move. 8 inches is a bit slowish if you're not planning to advance him, which now I would say you should almost always advance him. And you do that in the first turn and then advance him again in the second turn before charging in using your Assault Doctrine if we're talking about the current Gladius Task Force detachment, or if you're using the Advanced and Charge detachment in the new Space Marine Codex, that's even better. He's solid in the defense. He has 12 wounds, 2+ save, toughness 10, and has OC4. So the standard Redemptor stat line, nothing extraordinary, but he also doesn't cost that much. 175 points is an okay price tag for him, in my opinion, and I expect him to be further discounted or maybe buffed in the new codex, especially considering that he's a new model and the GW tends to be very active in keeping the balance of the new models correct because they want to make money with those. Next, synergies. What I like about this guy especially is his potential for mortal wounds output. That's why I think running 2 of these is probably the sweet spot, because if you're running 3, that may be too big of an investment, but when there are 2 of them, it's enough of a distraction to make your opponent really want to put something into them, and if they ignore Brutalis, then Brutalis will get to their front lines. If they don't ignore and start shooting at them, then your other army elements are probably going to stay alive long enough. So that's why I like the fact that he can actually do quite a lot of damage with mortal wounds on the charge, because it means that if he actually reaches the front lines, then he'll do damage no matter what he's facing, even if he's heavily degraded, or facing a unit that has the defensive stats that are in direct contrast to what he would like to fight against. Firstly, his own ability does D3 mortal wounds on a roll of 2 or 3, 3 mortal wounds on a roll of 5 or 4, or D3 plus 3 mortal wounds on a roll of a 6. And you can obviously combine that with tank shock for 1 command point for extra average of 5 mortal wounds depending on the target and its toughness. All this before the fight phase even started, so that's out of phase damage, which is good for a number of reasons. For example, finishing off a character and then proceeding to pull all of your attacks into a tank, or maybe finishing off one tank and then putting all the attacks into another tank. 1 CP Honor the Chapter is very strong for him in the Assault Doctrine because he needs actually both of those buffs, especially if he is coming up against something that is T12 or, God forbid, T13 or T14, because then he definitely is in trouble. He's the melee Dreadnought, and he really doesn't want to be wounding vehicles on 4s or even 5s. So he needs that +1 to wound in most cases, and AP2 that he has on his fists, and his fists are 12 minus 2 damage 3 with 6 attacks, or talons are the same. And those aren't especially awesome against 2+ save targets like most tanks are, so you really want that extra AP. And his sweep profile is actually quite weird. It's 10 attacks instead of double, so his base attacks are 6, and they decided that doubling that would be too much, so they stayed on 10 attacks at strength 7 AP 2 damage 1. So for some reason sweep is the same AP as the strike, which I don't really understand. I think strike should have been AP 3 on this guy, considering that he is the melee specialist. The Redemptor being AP -2 is fine, I guess, but for him AP -3 would be correct, and I hope they change that in the future. So 7 -2 damage 1 is good for targeting almost any infantry, light or average, medium, and obviously against something like Terminators you want the damage 3 profile. Coming back to the synergies, 2 command point only in death is also good occasionally if there is something that is on 1 or 2 or something wounds left, and you can count that you would probably kill it on the fight back, and you pay 2 command points, and after your Dreadnought goes down, you can fight with it after death. Just be careful not to waste 2 command points, because that's quite a precious commodity nowadays. So really calculate if you will be able to do enough damage to justify that expense. Recipient for 1 CP adaptive tactics, because if you've already consumed your desired doctrine for this particular unit, it might be a very good option to use it if you need to fall back and charge, or if you need to charge after advancing. There are a lot of cases where that stratagem can be useful on Brutalis, and in general that's just quite a good stratagem. Also, if you're running a Tech Marine, doing the +1 to hit for Brutalis, so make sure that he hits on 2s, and also putting the extra wounds on Brutalis if somehow he gets hurt before managing to get to the enemy lines, which is quite possible, is going to be very beneficial. Not sure if it's going to be really easy or hard to get Tech Marine to keep up with the Brutalis, because you're going to be advancing him, but if you are running Tech Marines in general, obviously any extra vehicle in your list is going to usually increase the efficiency of having that support character. Talking about the killing of a knight, with a full set of buffs, Brutalis can do about 22 or 23 wounds to a knight. In order to make that happen, you will have to spend SCP for Tank Shock, SCP for Honor the Chapter, and also put Oath on that knight. You mostly need that for the hit roll and for your multi-melters, because the wound roll on the fists or talons themselves is already being rerolled with Twin Linked, and his multi-melters shooting in the melter range. In that case, you will need to roll average on both mortal wound abilities and roll average on the multi-melters, and you should get to that 22-23 wound mark if my math was correct. And I think that proves that the 175 points is a good price tag for this particular unit. Maybe he needs a couple of small buffs here and there, but otherwise it's a perfectly usable piece of kit. Regarding the incoming codex, we've seen the previews on Warhammer Community, so we know that there is the Lightning Assault Detachment coming, which is going to provide us with the charging after falling back or advancing for the entire game, and that's wonderful for Brutalis. You might argue that then you might want to run 3 of them, because you will be advancing them constantly. Yes, you will not be able to shoot the multi-melters until you are really up close, but that's still very, very good, and you will be able to move quite a lot further than just moving 8 inches. The same goes for the reactive movement of Wind Swift Evasion. So something ends a move within 9 of the Dreadnought, you can move 6 reactively, and that can be very useful, especially to cut corners when you're trying to make Dreadnought survive the shooting phase in order to give him a chance to charge later. So that 6-inch move can be the difference between the Dreadnought being shot by 4 tanks or Dreadnought being shot by 2 tanks and potentially surviving. I really, really like the Lightning Assault detachment. I'm looking forward to seeing what else we're going to have there in the enhancements, in the stratagems, and how that stuff is going to work. Also, the Iron Storm Spearhead looks promising for the reroll to hit, wound, or damage. We really need that reroll to hit with the Brutalis, and also the damage reroll can be nice in the shooting phase for the Meltas. Considering nerfs to the Oath that are coming over, and the fact that we're not going to be rerolling the Wound Roll, his Twin Linked Fists, and the Iron Storm Spearhead looks very interesting. Stratagem Ancient Fury that gives +1 toughness, +1 save, +1 move, +1 leadership, +1 OC, and +1 hit. That's probably the longest list of buffs I've seen in a stratagem thus far. Is going to be a very strong package for Brutalis, especially the move and +1 to hit part, because the extra move is just +1 to charge. You can interpret it like that. +1 to save is substantial to his survivability, especially in cover, especially if you still, and we will have Armor of Contempt still, then it's going to be quite interesting. I'm not sure if you can modify this save characteristic beyond 2+, and how will that work in the stratagem. I'm really interested to see if it's going to be actually useful or if it's going to be redundant, but in any case, +1 hit and all other buffs are very much worth 1 command point in some cases. And 1 CP auto explode is just what we are looking for the Brutalis, because running him into the lines and exploding is one of the sweetest things you can do with this 175 points model. Re-rate this model now. I think you can build some very interesting lists with this guy, especially like a duo or trio of them, and when the new Codex Space Marine drops, I am sure we'll get some nice synergies out of that. And if you're looking for some help with your list, Space Marines or otherwise, please check out my Patreon link in the description, and I can help you fix your list or prep you for tournaments. And if you have any questions, leave them in the comment section below, and I'll see you next time.